Okay. Right, shall I begin?
Yes.
Okay. This will be a very easy, relaxed talk about lots of little components and pieces, and it's okay if the pieces don't come together. It's just we're just going to play with some ideas and some concepts. I've been doing a lot of work in the last year with regards to a protocol called the Gemini protocol, and this is like 1992 internet. But instead of it having the security vulnerabilities in it, they did put on TLS so that you would be able to have a key and say, I am this person, can I have this information? And this is a simple protocol, so they go, well, yeah, I asked for the ID, you've given me the ID, you said there you go, and that's it. It's like working in a pub or going to a pub or a bar and just buying a drink, and they're not saying, hello, I'm going to trace you indefinitely for the rest of your life, or until you realize that, yeah, so every pub you go into, every bar you drink, I'll know all of the beers and I'll know all of the people you are hanging out with when you're drinking the beers and various things like that. It's very silly, it's very weird, and it's very stalkerish. That's one of the problems with the internet. And I found it very refreshing that this sort of simplified internet approach allows for things to be a bit more decluttered and deal with things. So this is just a simplified this is an example of a come in, don't be frightened, please sit yourself down. So this is just a simplified Twitter instance, for instance, that somebody had in effect just got a SQLite database, and they put it into a simple format so that you can deal with things. So you just have all of this kind of things where you have the replies and you have the actions, and you can just click a button, and these simple browsers will allow you to set up the identification so that when you return to the site that they will remember you. But let's see, so we could copy the page source, and let's put it in somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. So this is absolutely nothing. So just we've got to highlight. We'll highlight some forms. So what's now yellow is how you introduce a link. So you would have a line starting with the equals and then the closing angular parenthesis, and that is a link. And so, for instance, you have the username and following that, which is the URL. In this instance, it's a subset of the specific website because of the leading dash, and then after that you have some various comments. You have for instance, this block quote here. So I'm just going to highlight that. That's 3 black backticks for starting it and closing off. So a block, and that's very simple. You have the comment form just after that on the leading one, and you can just write whatever. And yeah, you have the various types of headers, which with the hash symbol. So you have only 1, 2, or 3. Boom. This is such a simplified content style that you don't have italics, you don't have bold, You do have bullet points, but it's only based upon the classic wildcard character, which is fine. And it's just, yeah, it's simple, but it is actually convenient in terms of writing prose, because you don't have you don't get unburdened. You think in a more structured way. You don't, because it gets very complicated when you put URLs, for instance, within a block of text, and it gets very hard to deal with and to parse and various forms. So I felt that I write better with regards to that. And in terms of my general project and focusing on GemText, I've been focusing on Kanban boards and sort of knowledge management. So to, for instance, create a context where somebody is working on a project or trying to complete a task, and they need to think in an orderly manner regarding what needs to happen and why. And for me, GemText is very useful because it's got such little markup that in effect you're not distracted, so you can just get what you need done out of your system, and then it's done and you're dealt with. And obviously there are some trade-offs with such a design thing with regards to that, and so I found a format which would be able to complement that and sort of have strengths where some of the deficiencies lie. And so what I had was to find a thing within Emacs which is a K outliner, which is in effect a hierarchically based format. So what you in effect, I'm just going to highlight the thing, the approach. So it's, you in effect have you start off with a number leading a block, and then it's a kind of rotation between letters and numbers depending on the hierarchy. So I'm just going to do A to Z and then 0 to 9, and then.
Could you display bigger fonts?
Yes, of course. Sorry. So let's try that. So yeah, is that posterity will thank you, and it's so here you have just something which I had notes for a separate talk. And so, for instance, you have, the 1A, which would be a child of 1, 2A2, which is a child of 2A, which is a child of 1. But and you can actually have within these areas, you could have repeating lines, and that is still within a block. So you have a very nice form, and you can add children, and you can move it. But where it gets really interesting is the fact that this is designed in a specific way so that you have the notion of buttons and actions and things linking to each other. Oh, what? I really did do too many examples there. Doing redo. Oh, this is not what you want in a talk. Right. So we'll just ignore that. So here is an example of something linking to another document. So I can just click an action button, and it loads up this other thing. And the tool set which works within this format allows you to, for instance, move to character 4 on line 14. So you have a kind of precision which you don't actually normally get with say the way in which you interact on a browser, because you're still confined to anchors in spite of all the complexity within these various things. And one of the nice things, at least within this K-outliner format. Oh yeah, thank you. You would make a great chair. You can lead Software Freedom Day next year. Yeah. But yeah. So yeah, for me this is very nice, because on one side I've got something which can handle prose and which just allows me to write unencumbered. I have this other format which allows me to structure things in a very hierarchically based format. And within Emacs and within the toolset which created this file format, you can rearrange the blocks of this document and from other documents which are referring to a specific block. When that target block gets moved, it can update. Admittedly, there are some carnets, so for instance, you wouldn't be able to move a block from one document into another, but that's just because of, I guess, the governance of which this project is developed, that the people who've developed it haven't felt the need to resolve that type of problem. And there are some hacks I've come up with which allowed me to cross-reference things, which is a bit dirty, but it's all nice and functional. And so what I've been doing over the last year, principally for a European project, is to hang on, is to marry these two file formats and present it into a data list, which permits me to sort of have more of a kind of neutral overview. And with that, the idea is that you have something which can sort of sit across multiple formats. And often seems to be the approach that you have to have one format and you can output it and export it to something else. But because I'm dealing with some very simple syntaxes, it allows me to be able to combine the two together. Let's see. So I chose for this project. I'm making it bigger. Don't worry. I'm learning. So so what I did was use a very interesting parser called TXR, and within this this is very good at dealing with semi-structured data. I've had a long interest in regular expressions and parsing, and this one seems to be very good and as a kind of very strong tool which can work in different ways. And having even just spent a year with it, I'm still touching the very basics, and it's one of those curious tools which is both accessible, that you can throw off something, but at the same time it's got these whole rafts of complexity if you really go down to it. So this is someone who came up with a parser and went, I'm going to turn it into its very own Lisp, and that's anyone who can create a Lisp is very talented in themselves, just and some of the approaches. But somebody who starts from a parser and goes, yeah, I might as well turn it into a Lisp now, and then it's its own form. That's very nice. There was an anomaly I discovered, which in effect I reconciled this TXR parser with this gemtext form, and what did I call it now? La 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 la. Yes, there we are. So I managed to find a way of sort of combining the two principles, and I realized that I could write this TXR within gemtext, which is the format of this Gemini, connected to this Gemini protocol, and that would exist as a legally within the gemtext world. So a gemtext browser would be able to read it and go, okay, that's fine. But then I ran it through the parser, and then it was able to, in effect, compile and generate a different document. So, for instance, here I did the classic. Let's see. Let's bust out the colours again. Everybody likes colours. So here we have, for instance, the @ symbol and the semicolon, which is just to denominate a comment within the TXR as a format. So it's just providing some descriptions. Here is the more kind of genuine in the pink. So for instance, there's we'll do it with the opening delimiter, and you see the green there, so here you've got the binding, which is saying just associate this and create a binding where this hello world is formed when you based on various things, and the output on this line, it sort of starts a point where it's just flushing out, and here I'm just writing regular gem text, but within this area here, which I will demarcate again. It's, yeah, within this block with the pink, where you have the thing saying hello world. Were I to compile it, it then does hello world exclamation mark, and that's very nice because I've managed to combine something with a parser which is built on 70,000 of C code and has its own syntax with for instance these @ symbols and parentheses and blocks to start and stop. But I can just write this gem text uninhibited within the output block, and there's almost next to no kerfuffle. The main problem I discovered is the fact that if you wanted to represent an @ symbol within this block form, that you have to repeat the character twice, which would no doubt trip somebody up, but ultimately it's not the biggest deal in the world. And so, for instance, I could run a service where I present both the raw information and the compiled form, so that, and you could present that as tabs within an environment. So then you can in effect have, so somebody goes, hey, that was an interesting article, I wonder what was underneath it. So for instance, you know, here I've just done some here I've just declared something as simple as hello world, but you could have a chain of files which is referring to a script in which this thing might be calling. And so for instance you could have a full declaration of how and why a document was formed, and for me that's very nice and special. Just to complicate things further, this is a sort of a manifestation of a type of solipsism which got a bit too far. About 9-10 years ago, I started partitioning config files, and I adapted what I did from when I did monitoring for a European association of using just shorthand characters for demarcating things. So back in the days I would use parentheses of different things to, for instance, differentiate between an economics thing or a politics thing or something cultural, so that rather than going through the alphanumerics when adding a tag or a definition for something, I would have a categorical theme. And so what I did was try and take the assumption that if you were to have a classification system, that the classification system should be modeled on the central area of the keyboard, and because that's obviously that's the shortest path for expressing something, and it's also the shortest path for having the recall and dealing with things. And so what I had sort of evolved from just trying to, for instance, configure my Vim setup and demarcate settings and sort of configuration, as well as tools, as well as, for instance, separating a file regarding moving within a document or templating and various things. But I did this over so many iterations, over so many years, that it started infecting everything in my system. And so, for instance, I ended up not just having a directory structure and a name structure, but it would start deciding what a variable was. So as well as the functions, and I started using the terms for describing tasks and various points, and this is based upon the green on the board here, which was a 6x3 setup, of which you might repeat it twice So rather than just with a H, it would be a HH. But what I did just to sort of differentiate was to use the Q, the W, and the E sort of at the kind of top left of the characters on a keyboard to provide emphasis. And only recently sort of fully realised that just how complex, because this is, I eventually got round to just permutating this stuff, and for instance having a block which with one annotation that could be potentially between 2 and 3 characters, but my setup has evolved so that, for instance, I could put 2 together and they're combined in a various form, let alone the fact that you have a second chain as a kind of child block annotation. And just the first block containing potentially two characters or up to 6 representing 2 of the large ones combined was something like it was just under 17,000, let alone I was too terrified to combine it to see between 1 and 4 annotations, because I saw the file size and it was very big, and it was horrible just to sort of imagine in terms of that. But because I've been trying to put archetypes within these 36 settings, as well as the subtleties of having sort of 4 types, which in effect distinguish between whether something is coming in or something is coming out, or whether something is normative or positive, or whether it's being destroyed. I have a lot of subtlety where I can deal with things, and so in terms of wrapping up my own specific project, I've been sort of making sure that this sort of sits with the 2 aforementioned file formats, and it can sort of sit within a document, or it can be a kind of description, and it provides a lot of scope in which conventional models of computing don't quite have, because it sort of comes in a very specific way. And perhaps I'll just give a quick example of la 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 la. Ah, yeah. So this is the home folder. I'm just going to run fzf, and this is in effect 10 years of me annotating with a system. So there's what I refer to as a bloom, which takes this notion of the annotations, but places it as when we look at a Linux file hierarchy system, we think of the system as a root that you start in with the base, and then you have things like home and USR and various things like that. But I've actually concluded that everything's actually the opposite direction, and so these things which I refer with a kind of 1Q, which would refer to my own scripting, or 2Q, which would be documentation, or 3Q, internal project code, or 4Q to deal with transferring of content, 5Q to deal with configuring, and 6Q external tools. But these are in effect gonads, to use a more polite term. That these are like sexual organs, or like the blooming of a flower. That in effect you have, and that all of the folders and files and pieces within it are, if not, I guess with the directories you could call it more of like a kind of stem, but everything which you actually input data is more like the roots in the ground, sort of pulling deep and down and stretching across underneath. And yeah, there's some very I think we actually look at the whole thing and we see that that leading slash, and we just take it in terms of that. But it's the opposite way, that everything else is coalescing, and it propagates at these kind of archetype points around it. And at least this is how I've structured it. Makes me sort of really see in which things kind of play out. So just to give an example of sort of how it. So for instance, here is a HQH, which for me is an annotation regarding which would cover things like parsing. And so for instance, I could do OQ, which would give me a list of different things. So there's an example of Lua, but I could, for instance, do KQ, which is a file format, and then it presents things. So here example is gemtext. There's some things regarding HTML. There's examples of XML earlier. And this kind of logic works across my entire system, and so in effect these annotations are operating more like ants. So an ant by itself, or even just a small number, they're pretty stupid and deal with things. But when you have more and more of these things, there's a kind of aggregate intelligence, and it works in a kind of, not in a classic sense of in which computer systems works, but more in terms of body language, because there's a kind of curious dance in terms of these things, because obviously you could be writing an annotation in a slapdash way, and the annotation you may have a different opinion later on than when you initially expressed something, and this is something which is quite natural in terms of us as human beings, but we're very focused on computers giving us a very specific answer in a yes/no way, and an efficacy. But because a lot of my focus has been in terms of knowledge management, I have to accept that humans are pretty poor and pretty shitty, a bit like this talk. That was my one joke for the day. And so you actually have to deal with the fact that people are going to make mistakes, and people are going to articulate things, if not the meaning or perspective of these things shift as time moves on. And I like the fact that when I interact and operate with this methodology and this discipline, I don't have to get things straight away, but it gets me to that point close enough to deal with things and jump across. And this is also something which this K-outliner format is very good at, because it does have the precision of you being able to jump precisely to somewhere. So you can have a scatter graph of various blocks and documents, and they can be jumping around and moving around in this kind of chaotic way in which people describe and take notes and move on and forget. But it all sort of coalesces with for instance, it's something very difficult for people to understand, and it's something which it's a world which I've been inhabiting and dealing with for a very long time. So I think of it as a kind of modernity, and obviously there are many types of modernity, and some types of modernity die, and other things just become the norm after a while. And this is something where, in effect, I've just by this kind of way, this circular way in which I've done it, I've confronted the prejudices that I've had myself regarding information systems, and as well as the fact that we do have a lot of baggage in terms of what people came up with only 1 or 2 generations ago when it comes to computer programming. And there's some people here who have interests in other things beyond IT or including history. And you look at the Industrial Revolution, and if you just imagine like the first people who started doing things in the Industrial Revolution, if that just created the channel and pathway which we all followed as a funnel, then that would be pretty weird. And we have all these modern computing, and I'm very happy to go back and use tools like, for instance, I'm going to be outputting a lot of my system to LDIF, which was created by the founder of Unix, because that's a very strong tool in various things. But I don't have to be confined by the assumptions of how such a tool gets used and what it's used for even. And I like the fact that for instance this annotation system can sit with this this simple file format and this more hierarchical file format. And until I started having to make it more extensible, my parser was only 2,000 lines of code, and that's for me that's very comforting that I can operate at a minimalist point, which in which it can be all absorbed into my head, and there'll be people in this room who have seen my coding and they just think, good Lord, what's he doing? This is madness, and various things like this. But this is for me seeing these annotations, I have this kind of pinpoint memory and recall, because everywhere I'm saying, this is what I believe this to be. This is what I believe this. This is what I intend to be, because this is. I have a whole annotation class for. I'll run that through. So that's one of my favourite party pieces. So let's see if W. Do we know if W is a flag for words? Yeah, we'll try W. See what happens. So RQR. So this is a task thing. Yeah. So here is just a list of tasks. So here it's just going to run through on my machine. So there could be, maybe I've done some very risque tasks to do, and it's just going to fly by. It's why aren't you doing more? Why has my computer got shy? But yeah, so in effect, you can sort of see that there's for instance the opening bit which describes the directory in the purple, and you have these annotations flowing through. So for instance, if I have to cross-reference something and I need to search across, then I'm going, oh right, so it's probably dealing with that type of thing, and it's a bit of a hassle to have set up this, but there are only certain kind of thematic things that I'm ever going to interact with. So in effect, I've mapped out the form and different things, and the main situation I have is just switching one language or one tool for something else, because these annotations are they're pretty dealt with. So for instance, I don't need to come up with a new annotation for window managers. I might decide that the annotation isn't quite subtle enough and it just needs to be adapted. But these kind of very wide and it's a very wide. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of folders, but it's very shallow. So once I articulate things, I can just deal with things in a very very easy way and form. And it's this allows me to have a kind of totalism, and it's. I'm just using a classic browser here, but for instance, Hyperball, which the Emacs package I mentioned earlier, which provides one of the file formats, it has a lovely thing with the buttons which I made reference to, but you also have sort of subtleties like so for instance you have So for instance, I could create a context so that based upon, say, an annotation of mine, that where each point, wherever the cursor is sitting on terms of that annotation, or before or after, it could launch an entirely different function, and as well as taking in all the various forms before and afterwards, and that would just be me hitting a button that in effect it would know contextually, if I leant in closer to each and every one of you, you would all kiss me. You would all do it. It would be that kind of casualness that you'd just be too overwhelmed that you weren't expecting a second joke. That one, no, there was no laughing. There was just a bit of nervousness. It's like, is he serious? Would that happen?
Yeah. Not my model language, so.
Yeah, no, I know. Don't worry.
Which is why we appreciate the close shave you have today.
Yeah. But yeah, so you know, here is just a browser. But one of the nice things I realize is that this is Emacs, so this is a buffer. So I can just go nya 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 nya, and this is still a terminal interface. This is various things, but I'm not confounded. And what I realized just dealing with all these kinds of things is that that's a very peculiar kind of freedom. That, for instance, you have these sophisticated internet browsers, this kind of big warfare of everyone plowing all this code and various things like that. You can't write on top of Firefox or whatever the other browsers are. You can't just write over it, and you can't put your cursor on it, and you can't have a predefined or a general action which happens as a consequence of that. And so it makes me wonder what these people are doing, that a software which has been around for 40 years can have these kinds of principles built in and dealing with things, and yet we're all meant to be in thrall of this stalkerish HTTP world where you can't actually you can't do something by just clicking you can click on a button and you'll be taken to somewhere, and you can write something within a very predefined bit. If it's not a form field, if some programmer who's been paid 500 euros a day hasn't configured a form field for dealing with things, you can't write there, and you know it feels very lame. And I guess that's one of my themes of this talk, is that the internet is a bit pants and a bit creepy, and why can't I just note on something and have this autonomy? And you know, I get called complex, and I'm working in. I haven't hit 10,000 lines of code, and I've got simplified code. I've got hierarchies and structured thing, and I've got this crazy annotation setup which has far more permutations than I'm ever going to need to touch, and yet you have these. One of the articles which I caught recently was somebody just giving up trying to come up with a way of dealing with using Instagram. And so this person thought, oh, this is a bit of bother seeing friends' Instagram things. I'm going to develop a tool, and just, you know, time by time, some engineers over at Facebook or whatever they call themselves, meta holes, they you know, just giving examples of something that somebody had engineered just to simplify things, just being taken away. And yeah, in terms of freedoms, you as people who are probably never going to touch nor think about my tool stuff you have to deal with the fact that if it isn't you individually interacting with these kinds of services which don't want you to examine the code or even examine the content behind it, that you don't have the people who actually do put the time to try and make it accessible, and so that they can read and write and share and maybe even deal with, they're just going to give up after a while and various things. And this is something which will affect in perpetuity, because I guess that's what the world is functionally right now. And yeah, it's not even just about finding ways of tinkering with things and coming up with U-block ways and new matrix ways. And sometimes it is with things like software freedom to actually look and say, hey, this is we actually have to start from core values of, I should be able to read this, I should be able to write this, I should be able to alter this, I should be able to share this, and various things. And yeah, we have to come up with a way, because that's where a kind of security, in terms of us as a populace, we won't have security if we actually
can't alter and deal with things and stuff. I guess I've been talking for long enough, so are there any questions?
Do we really have to listen?
Only if I lean in.
Please don't lean in.
Okay, well that's it then. All right, thank you.
Thank you.